Welcome to this week's Two Men in the Middle. This is where two men in the middle of the country get together and talk about politics, current events, and other fun stuff. I'm Craig Huey.
I'm Brandon Kinnig.
So, Brandon, it looked like the Democrats got off the mat here this week and picked up the bones, at least, of the Build Back Better agenda and happened to get something passed. There seems to be some sort of movement with Senator Manchin out of West Virginia that's going to provide some sort of legislative package that's going to move forward.
Extremely significant. Everybody thought that Build Back Better was dead. They were trying to salvage pieces of that, particularly on the prescription drug benefit, some tax credits, and that even looked impossible. And then now we have this framework of this new legislation, which would be super far-reaching, the most impactful climate change legislation ever. It also includes the ability for the government to negotiate drug prices for Medicare, which has been talked about for over 20 years and has never happened. So this is huge. It's a $700 billion bill. Mm-hmm. It also includes new tax credits for solar, wind, hydrogen power. And the difference here is there's existing tax credits under the law that are specific only to solar. And the problem is those tax credits cannot be used for other emerging clean technologies. They can only be used for solar. And the new tax credit system is, I would say, technology agnostic, which means that it will also apply if there's other technologies that come down the road, which is very significant. The estimate so far is that by the end of the decade, it will have us at 40% below 2005 emissions levels, which is extremely significant. And it also includes tax credits for users that buy electric vehicles. I don't think the exact amount has been specified yet.
$7,500.
$7,500 is what I've heard
as
from.
a family under $300,000.
Right.
And I think there's a $4,500 one on a used vehicle now.
Correct.
Which
yeah.
That's new.
Okay, so that's where I was confused because I saw the 4,500 number after I saw the 7,500. But yeah 4,500 for used, 7,500 for new. Yeah, there is income thresholds there and restrictions, but yeah, so there's a lot in there. And again, so Democrats will be able to run on that, again, assuming this gets passed. That, and I think the Medicare prescription drug issue can't be overstated because, I remember as a kid that being talked about. That's been talked about for decades.
So I think what that loophole is, in 2026, they can negotiate the price on 10 drugs. On like 20, 30, it goes up to 10 more.
Yeah, it's a stair-step approach.
And I think for certain seniors, there's a max now that you can pay out of pocket of $2,000
right.
for drugs. I don't know which senior population that hits, but it certainly, for the first time, there's a cap on what you can spend on prescription drugs, which is good.
Right, and it's similar to how any large organization, healthcare organization, association, how they represent their members, in mass to be able to negotiate prescription drug prices. It's the way that most other Western nations on a government level negotiates drug prices. So it does bring us up to par with how it's being done elsewhere.
So, Brandon, this was one bill, and this bill is going to be passed through reconciliation, if I understand correctly.
Correct, yeah.
So this is the under reconciliation, you can pass things with a simple majority if they only impact budgetary items, I believe, is how reconciliation works, or something like that. You can't make new, but you can adjust the budget under this reconciliation project.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about the timeline of the Build Back Better bill. And is this what was left over of that $3 trillion bill? Is this what could pass out of the initial Build Back Better bill? Because Build Back Better came back sometime about a year-ish ago is when that first hit. And I believe the first kind of estimated cost for that was somewhere north of $3 trillion. And it was generally seen as a grab bag of absolutely everything coming out of the pandemic. One way to look at this, was this just a really sloppy legislative process working out between the Senate Democrats and Manchin that finally came to fruition? Is that one way to look at this? Or I guess as a Democrat, I thought this was dead in the water 2 weeks ago when Manchin came out and said, I'm done.
Well, and again, this isn't everything that was in Build Back Better. So,
but is this what could actually pass?
yes.
Is what it sounds like.
Well, and I think, and what I don't understand is I do think it was a sloppy process and we finally got to here, but there were some compromises done according to this proposal, which I don't understand why those could have happened before.
Sure.
So, for example, there are incentives for development of clean technologies, energy technologies, as well as being able to provide, for those that on the land side. But there's also, a give and take because Manchin was able to secure, I forget, I'm getting this partially wrong, but for every carve out for land area for development of green technology of some kind, the federal government will also establish new leasing for offshore drilling, for example.
And also leasing for pipelines, too.
For pipelines, too.
Which directly impacts West Virginia.
Right. And I know that's something environmentalists are not crazy about, but again, that was the compromise to get Manchin to support this.
So,
but I don't understand.
You mean we're taking the approach with Manchin, we'll take what we can get because it's better than what we have?
What I don't understand, that they not offer to do that in the beginning? Was that not on the table? Was it just all or nothing? Because again, that's something that should have been discussed back in the beginning of the process.
So maybe what we're learning here is that when you come out with a $3 trillion plus package of legislation, what makes it actually to law, or has a chance to make it to be voted on to make it to law, is about $700 billion of that.
Right.
So about $2.3 trillion of this wish list got lost along the way.
Well, it was
is that what took a year? Is just trimming out that $2.3 trillion?
Supposedly, I don't know. I guess it's confusing to me because apparently there's been this back and forth. Manchin was in, he was out, and so we don't know the nuances of what type of negotiation was occurring and how that was taking place. And so I wonder, was there just this reluctance to negotiate on some of the key aspects? Was it kind of digging the heels in the sand and we want as much as possible and we're not going to give up, or we're not going to do anything that would also, result in additional, pipeline development and leasing for drilling? I don't know. I struggle to kind of figure out why now and why this couldn't have happened many months ago.
So 2 weeks ago, Manchin says, I won't sign the climate change stuff. It's too much money, and I need to wait for the July inflation numbers to come out before I feel comfortable making a move. Pod Save America is reporting basically that Larry Summers called Manchin and explained to him that the legislation that he was signing, this bill, would not add to inflation. And somehow that made Manchin comfortable enough to sign this. I don't think that's true at all. I don't believe Larry Summers made a call to Manchin promising him that inflation was not going to go up because of this bill, and that's why he signed it.
I don't either.
I think the key to this lies more in the energy lease process that you talked about and what that directly means to West Virginia.
It gives him a win so he can go back and say, hey, I secured this as part of the legislation.
The only person who politically wins in this whole thing is Manchin, because he goes back to West Virginia and says, I held the line for over a year. I whittled this massive spending thing down to $700 billion, which in today's economy and today's legislation bills is much more palatable than the things we've been passing up to this point. I got lower drugs included in it, lower drug prices. That includes everybody.
And don't forget, West Virginia has a lot of seniors,
100%.
High senior population.
Capped up, so for some of you, the most you can spend at $2,000. And for that, I had to sign off on some climate change. I had to make some kind of concession, and this is what it is.
Right.
I think he walks away... Manchin walks away as a political winner because everything he needs to hold that seat and to message back to West Virginia, he got. He sets himself as a man apart. I'm not part of that progressive, whatever the Democrats got going on in the Senate. I proved that by holding out for a year. I got this thing whittled down to its most important parts, and he's going to be able to spin that to a pretty effective message to the folks in West Virginia.
Oh, agreed. And I think partially, too, maybe his thought process on this included the fact that this could be a legacy item for him as well. Like, I mean,
sure.
Looking at legacy, I mean, he's not super young. He has to start be thinking about like what he's going to be remembered for. And so, I think that there's an aspect of that because in the public statements he's made so far about this, he seems pretty proud of it.
I think so.
He's not downplaying it, and he's not saying, he seems to be boasting about it. So I think, again, there may have been a switch in the thought process there as well in terms of getting him on board.
And what's really going to be interesting is we're going to see who Kristen Sinema is. She's going to have to show us now.
Yeah.
Because it's real easy to be 52 voting against. It's really hard to be 51.
Yeah.
So her
a
political
lot of pressure
cover is gone.
Yeah.
She folds like a cheap suit and goes along with the Democratic Party.
I can't imagine she would do otherwise
because,
that would ensure not only a primary opponent, but a heavily funded primary opponent next time around.
And Kristen Sinema is there to entertain. The entertainment value is over. Vote with the rest of the party, and let's go.
Because I did hear, the one thing that she had, and again, this is a very diving into the weeds of the bill. There is one thing that she has long been opposed to, and it has to do with the counting investor.
Isn't that the carrier tax loophole?
The carrier tax loophole, which she opposes. So being able to reclassify investor gains as income. But I can't imagine her sinking the entire bill because of that.
No, I can't. If she does, she's out of politics at this point.
Yeah.
Or especially as a Democrat.
And then the other one caveat they said is on the House side, for some of the House Democrats from some of the higher tax states like New York and California, they wanted a larger tax decrease. Yeah. Which they're not going to get.
And Manchin pooped on that one.
Right. But again, it's about compromise.
And that's a great, this is how you play the political game, folks. Manchin craps all over the SALT tax. That is a blue rich state tax issue. It's not a red state tax issue. It's not a West Virginia tax issue. So he craps he gets that out of the bill, and now he can leverage that both economically, politically, and culturally back home.
Right.
He can basically say, I'm sticking up for what's fair by not letting rich blue state progressives get out of taxes. And why we can't see that and allow Manchin to do things like that is mind-boggling. It's going to be real interesting to watch everybody in the media that just absolutely said Manchin was a pox on the party suddenly do a 180 and saying his praises. And I think what we're learning is this is what you can get out of a West Virginia Democrat in the Senate.
Yeah.
This also has a 15% minimum corporate tax rate.
It does, yeah.
I'm going to have to read more about what that actually
So that was something that Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, had been advocating for. And the idea behind that is to make it less appealing for companies to go country shopping to find lower corporate tax rates, which has been a phenomenon in the last several years.
And what Yellen would like to do is have this spread all over Asia and Europe, where everybody's corporate tax rate is the same.
It's similar, yeah. So
there's no reason to incorporate in Northern Ireland because of the tax break.
Yep.
Now, so there's a lot to that bill. Where this gets a little bit more complicated, the political side of it, is how it's tied to this CHIPS bill. The CHIPS bill passed the Senate, I think, earlier this week, and I believe it just passed the House today. So do you want to walk through what the CHIPS bill is a little bit?
Yeah, so the CHIPS bill is this massive influx of funding for the semiconductor industry. And this has a lot of resonance because of our competition with China and China leading in the manufacturing of that. The idea is to be able to have a domestic manufacturing base for that, so we're not dependent or beholden on foreign powers, particularly foreign powers that are adversaries. And one of the components of this is to establish a lot of those manufacturing centers in rural America, so places that have seen factories go bust and that are hurting and neglected, to be able to revitalize those those towns and those areas.
Yeah, I don't know how they're going to do that, but that's an interesting concept that they want to make some of these technology centers for development and manufacturing located in the Midwest. They talked about Youngstown, Ohio would be a perfect town to receive one of these kind of things. So something that I've been hearing in the past couple days as China's intent to Taiwan becomes more and more, I think, in focus. let's take a quick side tangent here. Do you think Pelosi should go to Taiwan? Is it worth it just to shout, I'm an American, I go wherever I want, to just poke the Chinese right in the eye with a stick?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm conflicted on that. I mean, I think that, on some level, like, we shouldn't be intimidated by China to not, make those types of, I mean, we've played this dance for so long when it comes to Taiwan, but it's been interesting to see it get more and more attention over the last several days. But I mean, I think I probably fall somewhere on the side that she should still make the trip at this point. I think canceling the public reaction and reception of that would send the wrong message.
And Taiwan's important in this bill because I think Taiwan, South Korea, and Germany are the three main manufacturers of sophisticated computer chips.
Yes. Yeah, Taiwan especially. It's amazing to me, and I didn't know that until several months ago, that as tiny of an island nation as they are, they have an outsized role in the manufacturing of those chips.
And I believe Taiwan has a protocol in place that if China invades, the first thing they do is fry all those chips.
Oh, really?
The first thing because they do not want them falling into China's hands.
Wow.
So we're sitting here with an aggressive adversary threatening one of the top three manufacturers of sophisticated chips in the world. If you're wondering how the chip manufacturing affects American business, General Motors is projecting that this year's revenue will fall by over 40%, with the number one reason being they have over 10,000 incomplete vehicles they're just going to have to scrap.
40%.
Because they cannot get the chips to complete them.
That's amazing.
So think about that. Our biggest car manufacturers' revenue is down 40% because of the ability to get computer chips. So I like this. It's interesting to see a bunch of free market Republicans basically pass a bill that federally subsidizes semiconductor production in the United States. I happen to agree with it, but this is an example of the free market is until it isn't. And this is an area where if we're not making those chips, this is an area of national economic and military security. I'm okay with the government investing that money to help this industry.
I am too. And I'm a free market guy, but I think I also recognize the time and place that we find ourselves in, and the fact that the geopolitical risk of not having our own manufacturing base when it comes to that necessary component and the outsized impact on our economy. Our economy could tank if we don't do something to change those dynamics. Along with the rise of China. I mean, I think it would be different if you went back like 30 years. But based on where we are now, there's national security interest involved. There's economic interest.
Yeah. I like, again, how they put rural America revitalization into this.
At the forefront of it,
Don't know how much of that's going to happen, but at least it's worth taking a whack at to see if we can.
Right, because, we know that rural America is bleeding people, bleeding population, and, and is suffering. And there hasn't been any coherent answer for how you revitalize these small towns throughout the Midwest and rural South and Appalachia. And this may be the starting point for that.
I heard that the United States, we are the world leader in innovation. China is the world leader in manufacturing.
Yeah.
We need to marry those two together around the super chip industry and make sure we're making what we need here in the United States.
Completely. When it comes to that, like self-reliance, that is a need. And I do completely still agree with free market principles as far as free trade and being able to find expertise and buy from countries who excel at being able to produce particular products and goods and services. But this is one area in particular where the impact is just so enormous. Like, it is its own, I think, it stands alone from other parts of GDP.
I mean, to me, I go back to what Bernie Sanders always said. Hey, guys, we're socialist. We just don't get any of the good parts of it. We're free market until we're not free market.
Well, the United States has never been...
There's a whole lot of places that we are not free market. Brandon, we still
100% capitalist.
We still give the oil and gas industry $16 billion a year to offset the cost of R&D.
There's a lot of industries that we subsidize.
Some of the most profitable companies in the world.
It's more accurate to refer to us as a mixed market economy We
I can
have
live with that.
where we're like, some free market, some government interventions, so what you would call socialist, but we've never been 100% free market, and there is no system in the world that I know
Agreed.
of that's 100% free market.
And if China and Germany and South Korea if their governments are going to bankroll and support that industry, if we're going to stay on top of it and not be reliant on them, we're probably going to have to do the same thing.
Right. I would also add too, when you were outlining China's core competencies, I would also add copycatting, replicating what others do. Like they seem to do a lot of that as well.
But I think this is my point. We place so much value on innovation. The Chinese don't give two shits.
Not at all, yeah.
Can you make 1 million of those in a day?
Yeah.
Where we stress entrepreneurship and idealism, and that it's your passion and your energy that drives our economy forward, the Chinese take a much more practical approach. We're going to perfect making 1 million widgets faster than anybody else can make them before,
but depending
at a price nobody can touch.
That nobody can beat. But the consequence of that, depending on the product, is quality. So their goods can suffer in quality. I mean, we saw that during the pandemic. I mean, their COVID vaccines didn't work.
Yeah.
I mean, their COVID tests.
Well, why did that not work? Because they had to innovate. That's not what they do.
That's not what they do.
If we would have sent them the formula, they could have had 8 billion doses made for every human in a very short period of time. But that's a good example of that's just not what they do. Their economy, their culture, their society, it's just not set up to do that. It's not what they value culturally.
Exactly. Yeah.
And we can't be a dependent partner on that. And I think China doesn't make the same quality of chips that South Korea and Germany makes.
I would agree with that as well.
And the fear is that if China took Taiwan and they could basically force a great part of the world's market back onto their older, inferior chips just to get them, and that they would basically corner a portion of the chip market that we would be out of, and we couldn't recover from there.
Exactly. Well, it would shrink the entire chip market,
Yeah.
I mean, exponentially, and then it would, remove, a quality component, by not having those Taiwanese chips. And so, it would have huge ramifications.
Brandon, what puzzles me most about all of this is there's a real possibility that Chuck Schumer and Joe Manchin outmaneuvered Mitch McConnell.
Once in a lifetime event. I mean, Chuck Schumer is not known for his.
Unless Mitch McConnell came out and
Savvy.
admitted to it, I'll have a hard time believing this. But I think what we're getting at is McConnell said, I will get the Republicans to vote for CHIP because that's a matter of national security. But if you go forward with any of this climate change, tax stuff, we're out. We will sink the CHIPS bill. So 2 weeks ago, Manchin gives his statement that he is never going to vote for this reconciliation tax climate bill. The Senate goes ahead and passes the CHIPS bill with McConnell's approval. Then suddenly, 2 weeks later, Manchin has a complete reversal on his position, and they're going to move forward with the reconciliation bill. The tax changes, the prescription drugs, and the climate change stuff.
Right.
Infuriating McConnell to the point that Kevin McCarthy was whipping Republican votes against the CHIP bill that passed today, I believe with 14 or 15 Republicans still voting for it, because not voting for it is insane.
Yeah, I didn't hear I was curious because I didn't hear what the final vote count was.
I saw something on Twitter that The Hill put out that I think it was 14 or 15 actually voted for it. It's just saying, hey, I get it that we're kind of pissed that they linked these two things and they basically got over on us, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to vote for a bill that accomplishes some things that we desperately need.
I'm actually
right
surprised
now.
more didn't vote for it just because of the
true.
electioneering this fall.
So, Brandon, could that have happened? Were we all just duped by the long game that Manchin and Schumer played, and for all of my side complaining and just calling them morons that they're the ones playing 4D chess and they beat McConnell?
I struggle over that. I don't know, because the Democrats have never played the long game, and it seems to me,
and we never beat McConnell.
No, I mean, it seems to me to leave a lot to fate to have this just drag out for as long as it has, because I think the closer we got to November elections, the more it put the Democrats in peril. So for me, it's hard to think that this may have been the long game when they came up so close to the November elections that, I mean, if anything, did it go right and this didn't happen before the elections, they wouldn't have anything to show or for their candidates to run on. So I don't know if it's a long game or if it's just pieces fall into place accidentally. I don't know. It's difficult to say.
It's hard for me to believe that this was the plan.
Yeah.
Because the Biden administration has been dragged by the national media, by Democrats, progressives.
Right. Why not have done that earlier to shore up Biden's
Correct.
approval rating?
And why sit there for a year in a negotiation with a single senator that it doesn't feel like you're making any ground on? You're diminishing your power within your own party, and it makes you look weak until magically you get something passed.
I mean, Schumer has been criticized over the last year and a half for being very feckless and ineffective, and for good reason, because, I mean, he's had nothing to show really with Senate Democrats this entire time. I mean, this changes it. But again, why would you allow yourself to go through all that, have your reputation go through the mud? It doesn't seem like that would be worthwhile if this was all part of a grand plan.
So when we hit the midterms, the Democrats, with basically the slimmest of all majorities in the Senate and a 4-person majority in the House, if I have this correct, would have passed a bill over $1 trillion for a COVID relief bill, passed over $1 trillion infrastructure bill, passed the first major gun reform law in 20-ish plus years.
Right.
Passed a bill that redid how Medicare negotiates prescription drugs and cap costs for people, which has been talked about for 20 years. Passed the most comprehensive climate legislation that has ever been passed, I believe, by the federal government, and took a step for national security and the first step in probably many of fighting back economically against China.
And think about the pace at which all of this has happened, right? I mean, if you go back a month ago, the only thing that they had to run on was infrastructure. That was the only legislation of significance, because it was about a month ago that the gun reform legislation passed, and then now we have the rest of this. But prior to that, I mean, it was a drought in terms of having legislative accomplishments.
If you'd have told me the day Biden took the oath of office, if you just would have laid that out, I would have said, we're back. This is what the Democrats are. We're back. Putting into the context now of Afghanistan and just the overall Biden presidency, which has not been great. It's going to be really interesting to see when gas is still $4.50 and milk is still over $3 a gallon, and you still struggle to get meat sometimes in the store. We're going to really find out what pocketbook issue are how much do pocketbook issues drive midterm elections.
Right.
Because if you take inflation out of the mix, a lot of people's temperature comes down. They probably look at the Democrats very differently.
Oh, yeah, completely.
Do you think I think this obviously helps the Democrats in the midterm, but what does this do for the Democrats' brand if they're able to push these things across the finish line?
It finally gives them a message to run on. That's been the problem, is they haven't had a coherent message. They haven't had like these themes that they could, hit like bullets and say, this is what we're about. This provides them the ability to do that. Common sense gun reform, national security interest in increasing semiconductor manufacturing capacity, reform so that we can provide prescription drug coverage for seniors under Medicare. I mean, there's this litany of things now that they have. And then climate change, which has resonance among everybody, but especially those young voters, young Democrats who have been very disenchanted with the Biden administration, and that up until now, Democrats have said are probably not going to turn out and vote because they're just so upset and disillusioned. So they have messaging now, and being able to say that we are the party that gets things done. Because if you go back to the last several years under Trump, there was very little that passed or was accomplished. and Republicans tended to block everything, they can now say, hey, we are the problem solvers. We are the governing party. We are getting things done. And we're not just passing legislation in any one area. We're not, we don't have one single focus. We are trying to tackle all of these major issues. And we've been able to do some of that. So I think it does give them something to run on. And I think you're not going to be able to completely offset the economic impact with inflation and perhaps even a looming recession. But you can point to, some of this legislation, particularly, whether it's the assistance for people that want to buy electric vehicles, who see the high gas prices, and electric vehicles are a solution to that, an alternative, or being able to create manufacturing centers in rural America. There's economic impacts to all of those that are at play. You can point to those and say, hey, this will help our economy. This is one piece of the puzzle that we have to solve for.
Yeah. I certainly think this gives them a little more runway and a little more ground to plow coming up for the midterm elections.
It doesn't change everything, but this is the best thing that could happen to them before the midterms, and it definitely puts them in a much greater offensive position, right? Less on the defensive.
I'm going to disagree. The best thing that could happen to us is gas is suddenly $2.25 a gallon. Because while all of this is going on, it doesn't relieve the day-to-day pressures that inflation puts on millions and millions
Okay, I'll
of
qualify
people.
by saying it's the best thing that could happen legislatively for them.
Legislatively, correct.
Right.
But I think right now, if it's still $86 to fill up the car. That's ridiculous. We still have problems getting certain things in stores.
Supply chain issues are still
This is a risky...
pervasive.
Here's what I don't get. So Hugh Hewitt, Ben Shapiro, all of your typical economic conservatives basically have said that the working definition of inflation is when too much money is chasing too little product. Basically, that's when everything goes up. And what you want to do is have people stop spending money. So in a cycle where there's too much money, we're going to blow another big pile of cash through government spending into the economy. This had better work, because if this makes inflation worse and prices go up, because a lot of these things, you're not going to see the benefit, if you even see a benefit for them, for years down the road. If something happens with this, and in the short term, this causes more inflation, just by more speculation maybe of what's going to happen, the Democrats are going to have a massive problem on their hands.
Yeah, well, I agree. And I think that's been the whole challenge with the Fed interest rates hike, which, by the way, we had another interest rate hike this week, 0.75 basis points, is trying to get it right, because it is like threading a needle. Because you do too much, you go directly into a recession. You do too little, you continue to have high inflation. So it's like a scale, and trying to get it to balance.
So the Democrats did not follow your suggestion at all. Instead of slowing down, waiting, let's see what these interest rate hikes do. Let's see if the gas market stabilizes. They just went straight ahead. They're not waiting to see, is inflation going to die? Have we hit the peak? They're
also playing the game by a different calendar. They have the November calendar in mind, so they know that they can't afford to wait either. So that's part of the calculus for them. It's a little bit different.
They're taking a huge gamble that there's not a huge COVID outbreak in China, and China starts locking things down again.
Right.
Because if the supply line cannot produce enough products for the amount of money people have that's chasing those products, inflation doesn't go away.
Yeah.
It's going to be really interesting to see all the traditionalists when it comes to the economy about what government spending does to inflation, to see what actually comes to.
And I'll be the last one to make predictions on inflation, because I follow several economists, and it's kind of all over the map right now in terms of what's going to happen. I mean, there's several who have the mindset that we're starting to see prices stabilize, and that we're finally kind of, starting to go over that peak.
Yeah.
There's others that say we could have many more months to go. So it's tough to say. And then even there seems to be more agreement on a coming recession. And then like with anything, there's divergence in terms of severity of that recession.
Just change the definition, Brandon.
Like the Biden administration did this week. Yeah.
No, that doesn't count anymore.
Ugh.
It's a different one.
Just own up to that fact, and And I mean, say that, we're in this economic state of play right now, which, by the way, recessions are to some degree cyclical. I mean, you don't go forever without a recession. You tend to have recessions at some point. And if you're trying to get inflation under control, that's more than likely going to happen. But the idea is you want to have a recession that's as mild as possible so that the impacts are far less. We don't want to see anything like the Great Recession of 2008-9 over again. But, even since then, we've had a couple of mild recessions, which nobody remembers because they were very brief and fleeting. And, they didn't impact employment and the economy the way that people tend to think of recessions.
I read this the other day, and I hope this is true. The average bull market lasts 919 days and adds like 134% in value to the market. The average bear market lasts 223 days and reduces the market by 34%. So even when we're in the down cycle, we're still chipping off a huge 3-year run of gains.
Yeah.
And eventually these cycles, they don't last a year. They work themselves out fairly quickly. What makes this more complicated is we don't know what the state of the world is going to be due to COVID in Asia and places that we get a lot of these goods.
Right.
That's got to stabilize.
And the difference this time, unlike prior times, is the systemic supply chain issues, which did happen which were not a organic economic factor, right? I mean, it happened because of the government imposed lockdowns because of COVID and because of the virus. So that was something that was not, that not naturally happen. And we've been struggling now for a couple of years to fix that, and it's not fixed yet.
I can't believe any politician is not using the analogy. So we had we had a significant disruption in our supply line from China and Asia due to COVID. And look at all of the problems it's causing.
Well, yeah, and also because, let's be honest, I mean, a lot of this on China's part is self-inflicted because of their draconian measures they continue to take in terms of really forcibly locking people down, not allowed to go outside. I mean, we're 3 years into COVID. We have vaccines. We have treatments. Like, China is like the last country left that is still imposing these very autocratic measures and really shutting everything down. And so that's where the finger should be pointed, is China.
So if I were a politician,
it's unnecessary.
That would be my lead. And I'd let everybody in the crowd agree with me because there's universal agreement among that. Then the question I would ask is, and what happens if they decided to do it on purpose?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, if you want to really know the Chinese threat, what happens if they just decided we're shutting the pipeline off, or we're just going to pinch the pipeline a little bit? That's the type of pressure that China can put on the United States economy. And I think maybe there's an opportunity with what's happening now for somebody to educate folks on that. And there's a path for legislation that can open up as well.
I agreed. And I think that, I mean, we should be calling out China at every opportunity and assigning blame, because they are to blame when it comes to the supply chain. I mean, it really kind of all rests on them.
Or you could say we're to blame because we decided we wanted to make a whole bunch more money and manufacturing here is expensive. So we made the conscious decision to push it all over there where it's cheaper.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you go back to the beginning,
I mean, they didn't come over here and forcibly steal those jobs. We gave them to them as part of an economic plan. So
that's been over the last 30 plus years. Yeah.
Hey, Paul Krugman, maybe you weren't right that if every country had a McDonald's, we'd never have another war. Maybe when you hook all of us together economically, you create spheres of influences and certain powers that maybe people you don't want to create. Like maybe this dude over in Russia who's got Germany by the nuts now and all of Western Europe because they gave up their nuclear power and decided they'd just buy cheap gas off of him.
Yeah, well, it reminds me, there's a good book that is several decades ago. I guess it was written like in 2003, 2004, still relevant today, but it's called Jihad versus McWorld. And it looks at the, globalization and the power that has to inextricably link economies, prevent war, right? So that's what we've been told.
That was the theory.
And that was the operating assumption that was working throughout most of the 90s, but we saw that only goes so far. And again, that only, and that seems to really only apply to democratic countries and not so much autocratic states. But it does say that there is a reaction to that as well, that if you encroach too much on societies that either are not ready or are opposed to it, the reaction is this tribalism that forms. And then everything becomes internalized, and they become much more focused on not going outward but going inward. And so that is what we're seeing today and what we've seen over the last several years. I mean, that's why even many of these countries that have these populist movements that are focused on isolationist economic policy and foreign policy, it resonates from a reaction to globalization.
And I think what we've learned is there's pockets of the world where world economic conditions don't trump nationalism and tribalism.
Yes.
Russia can be integrated into the modern economy, and Putin can still have a stick up his ass about 100 years about something that happened in Ukraine, and he wants it back because Ukraine is his.
And we forget that many of these leaders and people in other countries, we play the long game. I mean, they have long memories. They remember wars that happened 300, 400, 500 years ago. It's still, very significant in their minds. We don't. I mean, we have the attention span of gnats here in the U.S. I mean, we can't stay focused on an issue that happened Monday if it's Friday.
And if you wave money in front of us, we don't think about anything else about money.
Yeah.
How much money can we make off just about anything? I think that's interesting that it's Russia and China causing these problems now, that it doesn't matter how many McDonald's you open in those two countries, they're not going to fall in line. They're not going to let the chance to participate in the world economy tamp down their nationalistic and tribalistic agenda in what they want to accomplish.
And conversely, more recently, how many McDonald's you close. In the case of Russia, they've closed, all McDonald's has exited the country, and that hasn't changed anything.
Let's end on this topic with this. Does this make you think any differently or feel any differently about Joe Biden's presidency if he manages to bring these things home, get these bills across the finish line?
I think it gives him the ability to do a soft reset. And I say soft reset because I think that he's digging himself out of a hole. So it's not like he's jumping out and he's going to have a 60% approval rating. But it enables him to stop the bleeding, maybe see positive movement in the polls marginally, and stop the decline. So I think it is a soft reset of sorts. And again, if played right, I mean, the messaging can be very powerful behind this if the White House can be effective on that.
Does it provide him an exit ramp for 2024? Hey, guys.
I think it does, yeah.
I came what I came to do. Everything passed. I ride off into the sunset. See y'all later. It might.
Well, and I think, again, it behooves him to remember that he was elected really to rebuild after the Trump presidency and get us back to a sense of normalcy. So, and some aspects of this agenda are very transformative, but in essence, he wasn't elected to be a transformative president. He was elected to be a transitional president.
Correct. And this is, listing off what they've done, there's no doubt. You can't make the argument that if Biden gets all of these things through, that his presidency was inconsequential from a legislative perspective.
Oh, not at all. Yeah. I mean, very consequential.
Just what he's been able to do with this package of bills, most presidents, I think, would call that a success if they went into the presidency with an agenda to pass legislation.
Right.
Let's switch over to everybody's topic, Trump and DOJ and him going to jail and just getting rid of him altogether. That's the only reason why I want to talk about this, because it might be that something actually happens and he just goes away.
It appears to be that way. For the first time in many months, perhaps ever, we have indication from the Justice Department that they are actually looking at Trump. They have been they've subpoenaed officials in the administration and asked specifically about conversations that Trump had. So there appears to be an emphasis on Trump himself, not just on the periphery, not just on his minions and his groupies, but actually on him. And so that is significant because, again, I feel like obviously the January 6th hearings are meant to accomplish. Set out the case, and they're not meant to, indict criminally. But I also feel like the January 6th hearings have really been trying to force feed messaging to the Justice Department saying, here, here's everything, you guys, like, go at it. And it appears that they are doing that. And it does remind me, because wasn't it, I think it was John Eastman, who was the attorney who basically authored the diabolical plan
the famous Eastman memo.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I think he was the one too. Was it a month or so ago, month and a half ago, that they raided his house?
Yeah, I think they issued another subpoena for his phone again.
Oh, okay. So there is movement happening here.
Yeah.
And so, and again, you have the Justice Department with their case, and you still have, the Georgia investigation as well, which, again, we've talked about last pod, that one has the potential to be more impactful in terms of the charges that come about. So, yeah, it's interesting. It looks like we may actually be headed in that direction. And then the question for me is, I wonder how this plays with Trump in terms of what he says and what he does leading up to November. It would not surprise me if he tries to usurp the midterms and make a surprise presidential announcement.
Please do.
And again, Democrats, I know, are praying for that. And it wouldn't surprise me, because he's all about himself. I mean, he single-handedly is the one who lost the Senate seats in Georgia.
He's going to do it for
back
you
in
again.
2020.
I mean, I can't think of a single man who twice has lost a party the Senate.
Do you remember back, and again, I know this is, kind of we're going back here. It's not, but those two Senate seats, I did not think actually the Democrats were going to win either of them.
I didn't either.
In November. And then it was amazing in terms of what Trump said and did in his conduct to see the sea change in terms of those seats going to the Democrats. And not just one, but both of them.
And I think that's what the Democrats are trying to bottle up for 2022. That what happened in Georgia, where obviously Republicans looked at Trump's behavior and said, I can't do it.
Yeah.
I just can't. I cannot reward that party for that man's behavior. I'm just not going to vote. And they think that they can do that again. Not sure, but Trump certainly is the only one who opens that door of opportunity to be
October
able to, for
surprise.
that message to happen.
October surprise for the Democrats.
Andy McCarthy made a good point today that during Watergate, one of the functions of the Watergate hearing, and the January 6th committee plays the same role. Committees can get at data that the DOJ cannot do. The DOJ, like when they issue a subpoena, there's many more consequences to it, but the committee can say and do things that the DOJ would never do. Like, for example, when Liz Cheney gets on TV and lists off everybody that's taken the fifth, that's not something
Right.
the DOJ would do. When Liz reads off the number of people who got pardons from Trump, that's not something that would come out in a DOJ investigation. So the DOJ is learning new information just simply because Congress doesn't have this as a restrictive set of rules when they do these types of investigations.
No, there's no restrictions on Congress. So they can connect these dots. They can be much more liberal in how they discuss the investigation than DOJ can. DOJ has to maintain a sense of impartiality and reverence, and is by nature more reserved when speaking about the investigations in general. Congress doesn't have to do any of that.
It just made the timeline fit a little better. Like, okay, it made sense to do this first because there's areas that this committee can explore, that they can get data that the DOJ can't, that then they can pass over to the DOJ if and when they decide to investigate and charge Trump.
And the January 6th committee isn't reconvening until September, but they have indicated that they are going to release snippets of information throughout the month of August, which I think is a great thing to do to keep the public updated and obviously following it and not, out of mind, out of place.
So we've debated the past 2 weeks about actually trying to convict Trump of a crime. Is there any way you think the DOJ would charge him but not move forward on the charge?
I don't see that happening, because I think that knowing what's at stake and knowing that, all of the eyes that are on this and all of the pressure, I don't see how you bring forward a charge if you're not going to prosecute. At that point, you might as well not.
So you're in. If they do the investigation and they make a charge, that means we're either negotiating a plea.
They're going full board.
They're
not
going to court.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm still looking for some sort of path where maybe they could make their point, but we don't go down that rabbit hole. But it sounds like there's not. If they crack the seal, you're in.
I think
you're
that,
in
yeah,
for the whole
I
way.
think that they go full board. And again, at that point, I mean, there could be some negotiation that could happen. I think the idea of Trump negotiating some type of plea deal where he doesn't run for office again is compelling. Again, that requires ego modification on his part, which I'm not sure he's able to do. But
What if he told the DOJ, you get Georgia to drop their shit, and we'll just package them up together, and I won't run? I could see him doing that, saying,
Yeah.
hey, you take me out of all legal jeopardy, and I won't run.
that I could definitely see that. That's the type of deal making he tends to do. And yeah,
Something else I read today that right now the Republican Party is paying all of Trump's legal bills.
yes,
The second he announces for his presidency, that stops.
yeah.
Because you can't have the party favoring one person by paying their legal bills.
No. I mean, although I wonder about that because the party broke new ground and all precedent when Trump was, well, maybe not completely. They did break some ground in precedent when they were full board. They merged the RNC with his campaign committee. That had never been done before. In the past, the RNC would support the incumbent president and there'd be donations and transfers of money. But in 2019, the RNC just said, look, we're just going to fuse our organization with the Trump reelection machine, make them one and the same. And that created problems with the, again, very scant opposition Trump initially had, within the primary, which of course fizzled out. But the difference too is if he's going to be running again this time around, like there's going to be other people. It's going to more than likely be a crowded race. So the RNC cannot afford to play favorites this time.
And I mean, Karl Rove wrote, I believe it was in the Wall Street Journal op-ed, where he basically said, hey, people are going to stop donating to Trump. He's not using this money for his defense or his campaign.
Yeah.
I mean, he came out very strongly and said, there's a point in time for Trump to raise money. There's a point in time to not to. And right now he's running danger close to losing his base because of all of the money that he's grifted off of them. For Karl Rove to say that in a Wall Street Journal op-ed, that's pretty significant.
Because he hasn't stopped raising money since he lost.
No.
So eventually the spigot is going to run dry. I mean, he relies on money from lower income Americans too that live paycheck to paycheck. I remember there was that whole scam with like the auto opt-in for the reacurring payments from the bank accounts, and then there was a major lawsuit because
you had to uncheck like 3 boxes.
Yes,
to make that donation monthly,
and it was super misleading. The people that signed up initially, it was tiny text. They could have easily
if
not
you're
seen that.
75,
Yeah,
you can't navigate that form.
Oh, and I think that did a lot of damage. But yeah, you have all that, so you've already siphoned so much money from them that you're doing yourself a world of hurt because then you're going to declare you're going to run for president, and then you really like need and inflict some money. And the problem is like there was no break in between. It's hard to go back and say I need more money now.
Well, while Trump was in Arizona doing his thing, Fox, Laura Ingraham had Ron DeSantis on for a 13-minute segment while Trump was speaking in Arizona.
So
That's
interesting.
a
Yeah,
clear
Fox did
sign.
not broadcast his speech, which I found
If-
interesting.
If the Fox entertainment team, the 7 to 10 folks, if they spoil on Trump, it's done.
Yeah.
He's over at this point. Let's end this, which is just with the Trump topic, percentage chance he gets indicted. Just today. If you had to give a gun to the head, tell me X% chance he gets indicted, what would that be?
45%.
Yeah, I think that's probably about right. I think they're leaning towards it. They're trying to get there,
Yeah.
but they're going to have to be very comfortable and know they're going to have a plan to what the conclusion is. I think before.
And I think if we hear more, I'm willing to increase the odds of that, the probability. But for now, I'd peg it at 45%.
Andrew Yang is trying to start a third party. I would desperately like a third party in the United States. I am very cynical that a third party can ever happen in the United States.
Because we know in the past it hasn't, right? So when we've had, I would even say we haven't had on the federal level successful third party efforts until, you would have to go back to the early 20th century, early 1900s.
Yeah.
Teddy Roosevelt and the Bull Moose Party. really. And then when we've had a strong third-party contender, it's been somebody like a Ross Perot, who it's less about people getting behind the party than behind an outsized personality that has a lot of money.
Brandon, how young were you when Ross Perot ran?
Well, that was 1992, right?
Yeah.
When he ran for the first time. So I would have been 6, 7.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Then you didn't watch any of his because during his debate he called Clinton and Bush like chicken man and potato chip man and stuff.
He was the first
great.
third party candidate that was invited to participate in the primetime debates, right? Because that had never happened before.
And his vice president, Admiral Stockton, I believe. Oh my God, his debate was classic. Classic.
So it was one of those debates where it was George H.W. Bush was infamously caught on camera, like rolling his eyes, looking at his watch.
He's a terrible debater,
Yeah.
old man Bush.
I'm a big fan of George H.W., but yeah, he's not a good debater. But yeah, so I think that's a challenge, the inherent dilemma for a third party. I'm not saying it's impossible. And if it were ever to happen, it would be right now when there's just this widespread disillusionment with the two-party system and, this rapid rise in unaffiliated voters. But again, you would need to have, I think, an influx of cash, a couple of dynamic personalities, and I would say a couple, because I don't think it'd be confined to one, because you need to be able to build a platform. So what's interesting about this effort is you have Andrew Yang, you have like 3 different movements coming together. The Renew America movement, which is run by Miles Taylor, who was the guy in the Trump administration.
Yeah.
So you do have a couple of different movements coming together here, and a focus on the economy and healthcare, particularly innovative side of that, and then trying to create a wide tent to leave open the rest. But again, we have very little detail now. I know that Christine Todd Whitman, who's a former Republican governor of New Jersey, is involved. There is a board leading this effort that's split almost half Democrat, half Republican. And it does include Republican officials going all the way back to the Reagan administration, and some Democrat officials as well. So again, like right now, it's been very showy. It's been very suspense driven, but we don't have a lot of detail yet. So that remains to be seen. And the ultimate test will be being able to field candidates who can run in different places effectively. I would say their first opportunity to do that, if they were going to be successful, there is the greatest third-party challenge in the November elections right now is Utah, where you have Evan McMullin, who's running against Mike Lee, the incumbent Republican. And that one was actually incredible sign of the Democrats thinking strategically, because they united behind McMullin. They decided not to put up their own challenger, which again is smart thinking because it's Utah.
Yep.
And the latest polling that's out of there actually shows Evan McMullin neck and neck with Mike Lee. So I mean, that actually looks interesting. If you can unite Democrats, moderate Republicans in Utah who aren't crazy about Mike Lee, who's a bomb thrower, and then you could get something like this new Forward Party, their stamp of approval behind his candidacy, and they could inject a lot of cash into that campaign. That's where you could see success, and that could be like the foundational liftoff for this new party. But they need something to gain momentum. It can't just be rolling out a press release. We have all these names on both sides. They need something they can point to.
So I think you're right in that third parties usually spring up over a single issue or a personality.
A dynamic personality.
And that's why they always fail. They always fail because something might be very important for this very brief moment, but eventually when that fails or that ends or that crisis is over, there's nothing left to you to get excited about for that person anymore.
Right.
To me, a party is a political party's main job is to develop a platform of policies, how they want to impact the world, and then to explain to people why it's urgent and important to elect the people in their party to enact that agenda. And I think where parties have gotten off track, and this is specific to the Republican Party, they've stopped doing the hard work to put the agenda together of what policies, how are they actually going to impact the government, the economy, what's their position on social and cultural issues. That's really hard to do, and it also ties you into a framework that you put out that people can use against you. So instead, parties just mostly default to the easy thing. Just give me the biggest personality we got, and I'll just raise money and go.
So for Republicans, that was Donald Trump.
Correct.
The party ceased putting out ideas, and then they became co-opted under Trump, who had a mishmash of political positions and policies. It didn't even align with traditional Republican orthodoxy. And so you're at the state of play in the Republican Party today where you have this mix of economic populism along with isolationism. They're all over the map, though. There is no coherent set of policy beliefs today in the Republican Party.
That would be so hard for a new party to develop a completely new platform. Because, again, the Republicans just refuse to do it.
Yeah.
The Democrats, we don't have one either, I don't think, or not one that's articulated. And if you're trying to break into the game, I would think you have to explain really, really clearly who you are and why it's important to listen to me. Because if you can't get that right off the bat, you have very little.
You need an
hope.
overarching theme or issue, and then you need to have a policy platform. But then you also, if you want to be successful, realize that, if you look at, and Republicans in recent years on some particular issues like abortion have gone to the other extreme, where they've demanded this loyalty test, litmus test. So you also need to be a big tent, right? Because we're a nation of 300 million people. So there's a balancing act there. But if I were to advise, I would say identify a couple of precepts that are core tenets that you want as areas of emphasis and focus. So maybe it's on, protecting democracy, strengthening democracy, and, in the wake of what's happening around the world, as well as what almost happened in 2020, being able to inject innovation in healthcare, which has been a very static industry in terms of cost drivers for so long. And then you can have some overarching highbrow policy planks on other issues, but, be wary of getting too in the weeds on every issue where it becomes a litmus test, because ultimately you want to establish, if you're going to establish yourself as an alternative, it's going to be about, we're focused on innovation, ideas, and we're also, I think when we've talked about in the past, Craig, we talked about what Democrats should do, right? Running on like good government, restoring,
And that's my thing. Isn't this party doomed to why all third parties are doomed? They're starting at the national level.
Yeah.
That's the mistake they all make.
Well, that's what they need. They need a local or a statewide win to really be effective.
Correct.
And that's why, and again, I don't know that they're going to do this. They probably won't. But if it's all about putting out a press release, raising money without getting involved in any specific race at first, they're not going to have any wins or successes they could point to. And it's going to be harder for them to gain any traction.
And there's the second thing of why they always start at the national level, because they need money and they have to raise money. And you're not going to do that. Money and attention doesn't come at the local level.
So this is something where I don't know if they tapped into. So remember when Howard Schultz flirted with the presidential bid?
The CEO of Starbucks guy?
Yeah. Reach out to him. I mean, he's this like third party guy, right? This independent. He was a Republican, now independent. Like they need to get him to inject money and do all that. And then if they get a couple of like really big backers, they can then spend less time focused on national fundraising and more on strategy. And they really need, again, to be effective, that money would also be well used if they looked at top states and localities where they can have an impact, have grassroots teams on the ground, because they need localized infrastructure. And that's where third parties have gone wrong in the past. They haven't had any kind of local apparatus.
Yeah. And that's where I just love to ask Andrew Yang, what are you trying to do? Because if you're actually trying to build a political party, that's a 25 to 50 year project. Is that what this is? Because maybe, I don't know.
But you don't become a viable national party
Correct.
overnight. Yeah.
And you're starting at the national level. Why? Is there an issue you're after? Is it just better government? If it's better government and you want people to see better government, you should start at the local level.
Yeah, I agree.
You can put 2 senators under the whatever party in the Senate. What are those 2 senators going to do? Not much.
Right. I mean, part of the motivation for starting at the national level may be that they feel they can get more press and coverage, obviously, than they can starting local. So part
Build
of it is
more
a
of a
play.
brand, raise more money. That's where everybody wants to start, instead of just saying, we need to start slugging it out at the mayor of Olathe.
Yeah.
We need to start slugging it out in county seats.
County and state, yeah.
We need to battle local and county first for 10 years and then move up to the state level before we even attempt something. And just nobody wants to do that.
Well, on county and state, if you're running for statewide office, those require less money anyway. So they would have to spend as much time raising money because those are, less expensive. And I think particularly if you were to establish like, hey, pro-democracy initiative, we want to shore up, democratic system, like start with Secretary of State's races. Like,
that would be great.
Get involved in inject cash because that's where the power lies in terms of election laws. And then if you have successes, you can tangibly point to electing secretaries of state who are going to uphold the law.
Sure. I mean, if you wanted to make a financial conservative argument, you could start with mayors, county executives, like I said, people who handle money at local levels. That's the thing that everybody wants to have, thinks that their personality or their idea is going to magically create this national party. It's just never going to happen.
Right.
Brandon, I've been trying to watch more TV because I'm going to have to stop looking at TikTok here because I'm pretty sure TikTok's going to get yanked off the Apple and Google stores sometime in the very, very near future. As I've swung back into TV, I've been kind of disappointed with some of the TV I've missed over the past year or so. Have you watched any of like the Star Trek stuff on Paramount?
I haven't started any of the Star Trek yet.
All of that's gone to crap. The Picard season 2 sucked. Discovery season 4 wasn't any good. I don't know. I'm going back more to classic TV, I think, now than trying to find something new to watch.
I'm about to start the 4th season of Stranger Things. I haven't started that yet.
That's pretty good. But to me, it's a good show. It's entertaining, but I get it. The bald chick's got superpowers and stuff. I think season 5, they skipped to show them at their ages right now. The kids have gotten too old. You can't keep putting them back in that kid scenario. So the next season, I think, jumps like 20 years into the future or something like that.
That makes sense. So. Yeah. I mean, I think it's, it's at its twilight, that series anyway.
We were going to see Top Gun last week.
Oh, you still haven't seen it?
Well, we were going to go see Top Gun, and Joan's sitting on the couch, and she's like, hey, let's go see this 4:30 showing of Top Gun. I'm like, sweet. It was sold out. The 4:30 showing of Top Gun, 5 weeks after its release, was sold out.
That is
nuts. Like, that's ridiculous. I'm not going to go see it because it's going to be a crowd in there, and that's going to be terrible.
It's made so much. It is so worth seeing at the theater, though. If you're going to go see it at the theater, I would see it in IMAX or Dolby, because when you see it in Dolby, like the sequence where the plane engines are starting and they're revving up, like you can feel the rumbling like in the seats. Like it's such a cool experience.
Is it fair to say Tom Cruise may save the movie-going experience?
It appears to be so. Like, I mean, movies are taking off now, and so he may be the person to do it. I think the last movie I saw was the new Elvis biopic.
Is that pretty good?
It is actually pretty good. I was impressed. It's very fast-paced for a 3-hour movie. So, I mean, it's not slow at all. It keeps going. And it's Baz Luhrmann who did Great Gatsby and Moulin Rouge.
Okay.
So his style of filmmaking is scenes that quickly cut, and then he inserts like animations and split screens, and so things move quickly. And I would normally think it would be too quickly, but for a 3-hour movie that's a bioepic about a legend's entire life from the time he was a kid till he died, like, no, that's good. Like, it makes it go fast. It doesn't feel like a 3-hour movie. They cover a lot of ground. I learned a lot I didn't know about Elvis, and especially his manager. Who
is Tom Hanks super fat in that movie?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Like, he's in he's unrecognizable with the prosthetics. And
because I saw him like, that's Tom Hanks?
Apparently it took him 4 hours to get into the prosthetics every day. But yeah, it does not look like him at all.
So, Brandon, company comes to you, major motion picture. We saw you on the internet. We want you. You got to star in this movie. But you have to go through 5 hours of prosthetics and makeup a day. Are you in or out? I'm out.
I don't think I could do that.
Have you ever tried to sit still for 5 hours?
No,
there's no way.
But it's interesting. Some of that's been like the new. You see these actors and actresses that could be completely transformed in these roles. Like that's the new thing now that's happening. Did you ever see it was on NBC, The Thing About Pam, that TV show?
What TV show?
It was called The Thing About Pam.
No.
So it was based on this true story out of St. Louis about this woman who killed her best friend and killed 2 other people. Like, if you want to go down a rabbit hole, like go to YouTube and look up. There's like a whole 15-minute video. It's one of the craziest murder plots. The DA was friends with her, did it prosecute. And she pretended to be a Dateline. Anyway.
That sounds very St. Louis.
It was insane. Like, you think, no, there's no way this could have happened. And yeah, it happened. And now she's finally being prosecuted. But anyway, it was Renee Zellweger that played the part. and she ended up donning these massive prosthetics, a big fat suit to play this woman who looks completely different from her and is a different size and multiple sizes different than her. And she said the same thing. I think she went through like 3 hours every day of like doing that, and I can't imagine.
If I was an actor, I just tell everybody, I ain't putting on 5 hours worth of makeup, and I ain't losing a bunch of weight for no part.
Yeah.
If you got something I could look like this and just be chubby, so be it. But I'm not dropping 50 pounds.
That's a lot. You got to have a lot of
patience
to do that day in and day out for a while. Yeah.
And then work for that. That's just too much.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter being in the movies or not. That's our hour. Thanks, Brandon.
Thanks, Craig.
Thanks for listening to 2 Men in the Middle. Make sure to give us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. Check out our website at 2meninthemiddle.com. Drop us an email at 2meninthemiddle@gmail.com or tweet at us at 2 Men in the Middle. We'll see you next week.